What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Banks versus Davis. As you can see, it's just me, Davis, on this episode. I was supposed to be joined by Banks, but something came up. But originally, it was just supposed to be me, so I won't take too much time. I can do solo episodes, but it's always much more fun when it's Banks or us and a guest. But there were some things I wanted to talk about. First was the Royal Rumble, since I watched a good majority of it. And I've been trying to get back into wrestling, especially since the NBA season hasn't been as interesting to me. I'm not looking forward to the Super Bowl this Sunday, given the teams involved. I'm in college basketball as to me, it's something that I've really tried to get back into the last kind of 2 years or so. And the team I would have been interested in would have been Syracuse with Kai and Anthony, but they're not really having a good season. They just lost to UNC tonight, and his numbers are looking okay. But overall, the college basketball season hasn't been as interesting to me like last year's kind of was until it wasn't either. It just I don't know. It's tough. So I'm getting back into wrestling after really quitting it for almost 20 months. Especially, and I'm getting back into it after Amp called me out for not watching it. So yeah, I watched the Royal Rumble, and the women's Rumble kicked off the show. And I told Banks this. I thought the interaction between Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair in the first 2 minutes really set back women's wrestling because it was horrendous. Between them not deciding to eliminate each other and just doing fake finisher counters and the buddy buddy bullshit. And it didn't help that there was no one in the crowd. You almost thought you'd be watching an AEW show based off the lack of people in the seats. But I'll say that it started to pick up towards the end. I really didn't watch most of the first half because I fell asleep from, I think, the 11th entrance until when Brie Bella showed up. And when Brie Bella showed up, I was like, am I still dreaming? Because what's Brie Bella doing here? It had obviously been alluded with Nikki Bella the previous day of, the Bellas being reunited on tonight's Raw. They were in the ring at the same time. I didn't have the sound on, so I couldn't see if I couldn't hear, I'm sorry, what they were saying because I also was trying to fast forward that segment to get caught up now. And, Kiki was talking to me offline about something um, that she's seen and that Lyric, a shout to Lyric, saw in terms of the way women's wrestling is headed now after it kind of had a really big renaissance from, I guess we'd have to say 2015 to 2024 for sure. And it seems like the last year, and if you want to kind of go back, when NXT in particular went the 2.0 route and started picking the model type women again instead of the workers like Triple H initially started with Black and Gold, in which there was a fair mix of women who already kind of had experience wrestling and versus the women who just started to learn. And you can see that in this Rumble that there are women that they train from scratch. There are some that are still a little far off, and there are some that actually have done pretty well. Lash Legend showed out towards the end. I love that. I saw it in her early. Um, just in terms of her, not just her looks, but the way she was confident on the mic, she was confident, being on camera and speaking. And given how she was a star athlete in college, you just wondered if, hey, can this translate to in the ring? Not every star athlete can transition so well to wrestling like Bianca Belair, Roman Reigns, etc. So to see her get booked very well in terms of eliminating some big name towards the end, I enjoyed that. The final three as well with Tiffany Stratton, Liv Morgan, and Sol Ruka. I think they play that really well with the way they were trying to set up all three of them potentially eliminating each other at the same time. Sol Ruka went for her finisher, which I was like, don't do it. Just in terms of like, we already know how this booking goes in terms of like she tries her risky, stupid finisher, it doesn't play out. But I it's bad on me for being the women's advocate on the show, as I was pointing out a few weeks ago by saying that women had it tougher than men, in which I was then criticized by Banks and Eve offline about my thoughts. But overall, I would say that I kind of agree with what Kiki was saying, that there is something about the way the women's division is heading. And as I mentioned last week with Jay Cargill being a reason as to why it's not as good as it could be, in terms of they're trying to just put the titles on women who have the look instead of the skill, even though Stephanie Vaquer is someone who has both. But at the same time, they just have to stop. It's tough to say because I don't want to overly criticize the women, because it's not their fault themselves, with the exception of Jay Cargill, because she refuses to actually train inside the ring, as Mix and I talked about. But with Liv Morgan or Ray Ripley or so, they're only being booked in the same circles. I mean, we haven't had the big Bianca Belair Ray Ripley match that has been fucking almost 6 years in the making at this point, going back to NXT in 2020. And for them to always circle around what's going to happen with Charlotte Flair, and then now that the Bellas are back, it's like fucking A. And the only reason they brought back Nikki Bella was because what was going on in her personal life. And now that her sister's back, it's just like, oh, because the women's tag titles are that much of, you know, an afterthought, they're going to be the ones to reignite them. I guess it's tough to say, but I felt for the women that they had to open the show with that crowd looking the way it did. And the first thing that came to mind is WrestleMania next year in Saudi. You can't afford to let that happen. I'm not trying to be Dave Meltzer or Sean Ross Sapp and all these other guys about like the attendance and how that looks. It just didn't look good. And it didn't get better over the course of the show as well, because it continued to stay that way. It really didn't even get fully filled until the men's rumble. And I don't even think it was, I think it was what, 75% at that point. But I also was like not into the women's War Games match when I put that on. And then, yeah, I had said this when Big Sam reviewed War Games, is that I just skipped the Nikki Bella Stephanie Vaquer match altogether, because I'm not interested in watching Nikki Bella wrestle in 2025, now 2026, just because it's her good, doing something because she made the headlines in the negative way, not her doing, but so the company had to do some PR and show that they're a good company given everything that happened with the old man. And now they're in this scenario where they got to placate to her, and now that she's back in the news in a positive way, I guess, with the fucking Cooper DeJean stuff, and I don't know. I mean, the women's rumble, like I said, I'm glad I watched the last 10 minutes instead of the first 45, but it then segued into AJ versus Gunther, and it was a really good match. And I've always enjoyed Gunther's style. I think it's perfect, not just for his look, but for what wrestling needs, especially the way they want to present it on ESPN with the sports, atmosphere and it seeming real, because he wrestles like someone would wrestle if it was legitimate, with his striking and his submissions. And the match could end at any moment because his finisher is any move at this point, with the chops and the clotheslines and the powerbomb or the splash, or just straight out choking dudes out, which again shows something is legitimate when it harkens back to UFC and all that. And then was played up the kind of like TKO KO finish by him just constantly stomping and chopping AJ to the point where the ref might have to call the match. And I almost would have enjoyed that finish as well. Just I almost thought they were going to go into the route of him being disqualified, and that preserved AJ's career, because based off this sudden retirement, especially after John Cena's, there'd always been the talks that AJ was going to retire this year. I didn't know that he was already kind of looking forward to being a trainer for them and still working with the company in that aspect, which makes sense. He does seem like a guy who would be interested in training people, maybe not full time, but at least being one of the guest trainers that they always talk about at the PC. So and he still wrestles. I was telling Banks, I think the match of him and Shinsuke was actually not that bad. It's just Shinsuke is so much older and slower now, and obviously he tried to turn it on for that match. But as I was telling him, I'm like, they just haven't had the chemistry in their WWE matches. They had one great match in New Japan, and that's why it was so great, because it was years in the making from AJ just being there for that brief stint, and Nakamura being, the king of the mid card after he was constantly pushed to the side over Tanahashi and then Okada, and then once Naito was showing he was going to be the next guy up. So when they had that match at WrestleMania 34 in 2018, it was just very lackluster for me. They obviously had the hard task of following up the one 2 years earlier, but then the rest of their matches that entire year to me were very disappointing. I mean, with the low blow finishes and then the Shinsuke Nakamura heel turn, and the one that they had with the last man standing match was kind of okay, but overall, to me, their WWE matches have always been disappointing to skippable. And they had a good match at that Saturday Night's main event. Like I said, it was just the pacing of it. You were watching guys who back in the day were so much better. Even though I think AJ is, like I said, still capable of competing against the younger guys, the faster guys. And it also showed that the week before when he faced CM Punk, and it was the same thing. This is obviously not the same CM Punk. And anyone who thinks this is the better version of CM Punk compared to what he was in AEW is just on the tribalism side, where they're so fucking into CM Punk being back in WWE after he did all that shit talking in AEW, despite him doing all the shit talking in WWE. Everything he does now is so fucking beautiful and it's perfect. It's fantastic. Like I said, he can do no wrong compared to when he first showed up in AEW. Was this guy's old and slow? He needs to hang it up. And now it's, oh, look at the master at work. He again, because Finn Balor also showed he still has it, despite everyone criticizing him for basically phoning it in at times over his run or losing a step when he was wrestling a different style, because it's what his gimmick called for. But he was showing that CM Punk again isn't the guy that everyone thinks he is, and we saw that. But Gunter and AJ, like I said, really good match. And if AJ's retired, I respect it. I mean, he's been one of my all-time favorites. That's something Banks and I were going to talk about in terms of, he alluded to this on an episode of an ROP bonus with Amp sometime last week. I told him my theory is I think AJ is going to AEW for one match in particular, not a full-time run. I think he's just showing up in AEW to have the Kenny Omega match that has been long discussed since he left in 2016. Kenny Omega himself has said this is the match he wants in professional wrestling for his career at this point more than anything. He wanted that match with AJ, and he hoped it was going to happen in New Japan, given AJ was in the world heavyweight division and Kenny was still a junior at the time, and then bringing him into the Bullet Club. He pushes AJ Styles out of the Bullet Club. Famously, that's their send-off. And Kenny Omega takes control as the leader, moves up to the heavyweight division. But he's long said, like, that's his dream match, that's his goal. And, like, he might have even said himself that that's the match that could have gotten him to WWE if they had promised him AJ Styles even at WrestleMania, I think. Because he was always, like, I won't go to WWE. I won't unless they're going to give me this match and on this stage. And I think AJ would do it just to go back to WWE and be a trainer, like he says, and be retired. Because at this point, if he wants to be retired, by all means, it's the same thing. Like, again, I wasn't mad that John Cena retired. I think a lot of these guys from our era, in terms of the early 2000s to now, that already had at least 2 or 3 years in, should retire. I think Samoa Joe should be next. I think Randy Orton should definitely be next. Edge, for sure. I mean, he should stay retired the first time. But if it ended Saturday and he's not going to come back at all, I'm not going to be upset like, oh, I didn't get it right that he wasn't going to AEW. But like I said, it just makes sense to me for him to do that one-off, at least. I don't see him wanting to compete against Kyle Fletcher or have another match with Samoa Joe or have another match with Roddy Strong or wrestle Takeshita and have another match. I don't see him doing a farewell tour in AEW with the new names and the old names. I just see him getting the one match, and that's probably the match that they'll need to sell the summer show, being all in. And I forget where it's at, or maybe even Forbidden Door, but who knows if Forbidden Door will exist given how Banks and I are kind of talking about New Japan, and this, if there will be a New Japan. So who knows if there will be a Forbidden Door, but AJ Styles deserved it, and Gunter being, the career killer is a good use of him these days if he's not going to be the world champion. So that leads to the Drew McIntyre Sami Zayn match, and I told Banks straight up, Drew McIntyre is fucking cursed. This guy can't catch a break whatsoever. He was the champion of the pandemic era, and then as soon as crowds started to come in, he wasn't the champion anymore. And not only that, they had to take the title off him briefly in the pandemic era just to put it back on him so he had something to reignite his run, which was only stale because he had a feud with the likes of, well, I'm not blaming Seth. That was the Messiah era. Seth Rollins was a good Seth Rollins. It was a perfect use of his promo style and his wrestling style, but he then went on a feud with Bobby Lashley prior to the Hurt Business really taking off. So that was the other part that was like, if only this was months later, like it turned out to be. But then by the time they feuded at WrestleMania, the Hurt Business was done. So they really didn't use that aspect. But he was saddled with that long ass Randy Orton feud. And it was just so time consuming. Excuse me. And the use of the legends like Big Show and fucking Shawn Michaels and Christian and Ric Flair, it just did not suit Drew McIntyre whatsoever. And then he has to lose a champion versus champion match to Roman Reigns. Rightfully so. You can't have the new tribal chief version of Roman Reigns lose to fucking Drew McIntyre right after he's finally taken off. It took fucking like 5 years for Roman Reigns to finally get it, or to finally be used correctly. I think he could have been that way a lot sooner if the old man wasn't in charge. So yeah, Drew McIntyre, and then he has the Sheamus feud, and then he finally drops the title to Bobby Lashley, and then like I said, he's sits in that mid card to upper card for years. Yeah, he had the Clash of the Castle match, but again, they fucking cursed him with that because they obviously had to prolong the bloodline with the Solo Sikoa introduction. And then he can't even be the guy to dethrone Gunter's intercontinental title reign. That had to be fucking Sami Zayn, who he had to make look like $1,000,000 in their match at the Royal Rumble for whatever strange reason. I don't know if it's the Saudi love that Sami gets, but he gave him 3 future shocks in a row, and Sami Zayn did the Jay White barely kicks out with the shoulder, not the arm, just the shoulder rolls slowly up, and then I think even Sami Zayn kicked out of a Claymore as well, and they just made Sami Zayn look so strong in Drew McIntyre's first real title defense for this time, and it's like, you booked this guy like a loser because he can't beat Sami Zayn with just 1 future shock and 1 Claymore. Sami Zayn had to have all these stored kickouts to survive this long, and that's my point. Like, they just, either they don't know how to use Drew McIntyre, or he's cursed. Like I says, he's cursed. And plain and simple, he deserved at least a more dominant showing in his first title defense this time than what he got. And who knows, based off the way the Rumble ended with Roman Reigns being victorious, who he'll face at WrestleMania, because he'll obviously face the winner of the Elimination Chamber. I hope it's Jacob Fatu. That's who I hoped was going to win the Rumble. I either hoped they were going to do the brave thing in terms of picking someone brand fucking new to win the Royal Rumble, whether that be Obafemi or Jacob Fatu. Just do the real sports thing of like an upset no one saw coming, something that can only happen on any given day. Instead, they gave it to Roman Reigns. And am I going to stomp and cry that Roman Reigns won? No, because it was their safe choice. And at this point, they had to stick with safe choices because Roman Reigns is doing fake shoots on the Pat McAfee show. Again, that's how you can't trust anything what's going on. Look at all the factors involved. Roman Reigns is going to say, I had to sit on the sidelines the last couple months. You were filming a movie. That's what was going on. And who's he saying this stuff? That's, ooh, this sounds serious. This sounds like a shoot. Is he being honest about hating his booking? He says it to the guy who does commentary for them, half half of the year. 6 months out of the year, he's doing commentary for them. And that's my point. Like, stop buying their fake, real, fake bullshit. They sell you one story to just lie about it later on. And then they lie to you about something just for that to be serious. And then the rest of the Rumble, of the men's Rumble, I'm glad Obafemi had a dominant showing early on. And everyone wants to bitch and moan about Brock Lesnar eliminating him. Y'all didn't say shit when Cody Rhodes eliminated Trick Williams. So where's that double-sided coin in terms of, hey, why is the young upstart black wrestler got to be eliminated by the blonde white wrestler that, is always booked so dominantly? I hear no outrage about that, especially since they were more outraged about Brock treating Ilya Dragunov the way he did instead of, like I said, Trick Williams just gets thrown out by Cody Rhodes and it's no issue. But I forgot he's invited to the cookout and he can do whatever. So, but the Braun Breaker part of it, entering at number 2 and being attacked by the Masked Man and with a hood. I wish I could have remember who tweeted this, but they said that's Triple H's go-to. That's his only move he has is in terms of causing a shock and awe, is who's under the hood, who's under the mask. And I'm like, well, yeah, look at NXT. This was the guy who invented the NXT parking lot, the dreaded NXT parking lot, because he didn't know the answer to write people off. All he knew was, hey, we got to write so and so off. Let's just say they were attacking the parking lot, and then when we have an answer, here's how we'll explain it. So instead of him using the parking lot, because they're not trapped in Orlando, Florida, they're trapped in city to city, country to country. Anyone with a black hoodie and a black mask can be the person who we're going to decide later on is the attacker. And it's funny watching tonight's Raw and seeing Braun Breaker realize that after Adam Pearce pointed out that it was Austin Theory who was the masked man the last time, and Braun Breaker looked at him like, yeah, you were the masked man. Like, that just shows, like, again, they treat Braun Breaker as dumb as he sounds. But the Finn Balor not being in the Rumble over Mr. Iguana and La Parka, yeah, I didn't like it, but they're using AAA the way they used NXT back in the day. So since they didn't have any NXT call-ups in the Rumble, since the guys like Trick, Oba, and Javon Evans were just called up, they used them that way. But overall, I was just mad again that Logan Paul finishes in the final 4 of the Rumble. Like, why does he always have to be booked this strong and made to look like a superstar when he doesn't have any cachet like they think he does, just because he has 90 million followers across all platforms? Like, they're not tuning in to wrestling. If they were, your numbers would be bigger than you're saying they are. So, but overall, I didn't think it was a bad show. I thought it was way better than War Games, which was the last full show. Actually, I'd watched the Saturday Night Main Event with John Cena's Farewell. But other than that, I've only just been tuning into certain matches and certain segments over the last couple of months. Like I said, since being called out about not watching wrestling anymore. And yeah, that's just what I thought about the Royal Rumble. It was good to see Powerhouse Hobbs, aka Roy Keys, show up. It'll be interesting to see how he's used going forward, especially on what show. I don't think you can have him on Raw with Obafemi for obvious reasons, and he would make much more sense on SmackDown in terms of, I think he would be kind of the next guy for the U.S. title if they decide to do something with Carmelo Hayes later in the year in the main card, in the main event picture. And yeah, I said I was hoping Jacob Fatu I think Jacob Fatu, especially as of right now, has the momentum to show he can be the top guy going forward. And him versus Drew one on one, is that a WrestleMania match? Jey Uso versus Gunter wasn't a WrestleMania match. Okay. And I think Jacob Fatu is obviously leaps and bounds better than Jey Uso, who again stole the show in the Rumble by doing his pop and lock and Power Rangers routine in the middle of the Rumble just because he can't do it in the ring, so he's got to spam and taunt his way to cheers and pops and so on and so forth. But something I wanted to talk about, we're going to save the other topic, which was the Michael trailer drop today. The official trailer for Michael, the Michael Jackson movie dropped. Banks is excited for that. And I thought it was a really good trailer. So we're going to save thoughts till the next episode. But there was something I wanted to talk about in terms of what we want from movies going forward, because there are some things that are going on and they're both positive and negative. I've recently been catching up on The Big Picture, which is my favorite movie podcast. And when Sean Finnessy talked about seeing Minecraft last year and for his review, he had said, it's good that kids today and young people today who grew up playing the game have something for themselves to see on the big screen. That's what's going to get people to go to the movie theaters, is something like Minecraft, which obviously isn't meant for someone his age and or the rest of his demographic. Then at least movie theaters and the movie business can survive if what it takes is a famous video game which is full of ridiculous characters or quests and missions and all that, and NPCs. Then at least that's a good thing. And that really stuck with me because that was my point when I said I just want the Batman Beyond movie at this point. Like, fuck DC, just it's time. Let's stop having the fucking Bruce Wayne story and have the Terry McGinnis story. Because that's something I grew up with, like a lot of us kids born after 1990. I'll go 1991. That's something we want to see at this point, especially with, and it doesn't even have to be animated like Into the Spider-Verse is, but like the way Into the Spider-Verse is. Phil Lord and Chris Miller saw like, all right, we can tell a Spider-Man story if we use this version of the Spider-Man character, which hasn't been around that long. So what if we introduce him our way and this way? And it worked. It was a box office success. It was a critical success. It's an Oscar-winning film, the first Spider-Verse. Then the second one comes out. Again, phenomenal. And its storytelling and its animation style, all of it, box office success. And everyone's anticipating the final one, the one to end of the trilogy. But it's because we got to see a Spider-Man in Miles Morales, in Spider-Gwen, Gwen Stacy, and Spider-Punk, and, all that. It led to a fucking Nick Cage show that'll be coming out this year with Spider-Man Noir. And that's the point, is giving us the stuff that hasn't been used yet. And it's not just their scraps or spare parts. It's, if people are tired of another Fantastic Four movie or another Superman movie, given that the Superman movie was a major box office success, like even the Batman, Matt Reeves' The Batman was, but it's tough to say all this at the same time, because what we want are characters, lots of characters we haven't seen, characters we have seen, given that they brought back Robert Downey Jr. to be Doctor Doom this time. But that's what we want. We want something that's familiar but different at the same time. And that's tricky with movies in general. Speaking about Michael, it's something that's super familiar, but something we haven't seen, which is we haven't seen a big time Michael Jackson biopic. Not one made for TV, a big time one given the serious treatment. And that's why kind of some of the other biopics have flopped or, done really well. It's treating it seriously. Like the Tupac one wasn't treated seriously. It's why it flopped. It's why it's a joke. The Whitney Houston one was somewhere in the middle, but then the Bob Dylan one and the Bob Marley one, Bob and Bob, were treated both, as a big deal and did well financially but Bob Dylan did much more successful critics wise and awards wise. Um, but yeah, we want to see the stories, or at least the people that we know and their stories. And it is, everyone knows how this Michael Jackson story is going to end. It's just how you're seeing it, how they're showing it to you. And that's why it's going to be a big deal at the box office, and it's why it's going to be a big deal um, as an awards contender, especially when you see how great Coleman Domingo is in it. Rome, I'm not going to give out hope completely. I do think there's a chance. It's just like I was saying, they have to stop going back to the Bruce Wayne well, because now they're going to give us Bruce Wayne with Damian Wayne, and even that's something I don't want first. I'd rather take. I At least they're doing that, but that's because it took them what, 6 animated versions of that story to finally bring to the big time. I'm not really into the Damian Wayne stuff as much as other people are, because again, I don't fuck with the DC animated movies because everyone's always like, they're so great, they're so great. They're animated movies, and I know I was just praising the Spider Verse, but I mean, these are the straight to DVD, straight to VOD animated movies, not like the ones that, Spider Verse are, and how seriously those are treated because it takes a decade to make one. But I think we'll get a Terry McGinnis one in the future, just because they have to. You can't keep recycling Bruce Wayne over and over, especially how many Jokers are we going to get? How many Penguins are we going to get? How many Riddlers are we going to get? How many Two Faces? So on and so forth. So forth. To keep comic book movies alive, you have to use the other aspects of the comic books that you're skipping over. And that's where I think if the budgets have to get smaller for it to happen, then so be it. But it is out there. It is possible. And again, look at how successful Dune is. Look at how successful something like Akira was. Something like Tron, Ares isn't a good thing to point out. I'm saying these are all things that have aspects of that Batman Beyond has aspects of. So they can probably see, and again, obviously Spider-Verse is a very fair comparison to it, of what makes Batman Beyond seem like a surefire hit without us really knowing, because it's been 20 years since the cartoon aired. We're going to talk about that on the main show. Me and Banks are going to talk about that, so don't worry. We're going to save that for this weekend's episode. And there's not much to talk about. It was just finally announced that, and that's why I'm glad we're not talking about it tonight, because there still has to be some wait and see given a certain member's involvement in that particular film. But overall, it's good that it finally got announced. But like I said, it's because someone didn't get nominated for an Oscar. A week later, we finally hear, hey, this movie's finally in the works. But, and I say, what do we want from movies going forward? Because this past weekend, the movie Iron Lung, made by Mark Epplier, the YouTube star. I'm not really familiar with this guy. I know what he looks like, but I'm not familiar what he. I was never familiar with what he does. I think he just reacted to stuff like a lot of people on the YouTube popular page. I would always make sure just to block those accounts right away, because I hated the popular on YouTube page and all the people that were famous just for reacting to shit. I was just always annoyed by that. But he made his own movie, self-financed, called Iron Lung, a horror movie. And I'm bringing this up because it did well at the box office. And here's what Variety reported. Markiplier broke down in tears after his self-financed horror movie Iron Lung opened up to $21 million at the worldwide box office. He said, it's kind of a hero moment to showcase indie filmmaking is possible. It's been an emotional day in the best way possible. So I'll first say thank you guys so much. I personally don't care about the numbers other than woohoo success. I'm going to be able to give the crew a big bonus. This is awesome. I'm not a big studio, so the split with the theaters is basically 50-50. It's really cool because everybody wins. And even though I'm not a fan of this guy, and I'm never ever going to see his movie, he does have a point. He is showing that, one, independent filmmaking can still be financially successful, but two, to go back to the point that I made with Sean Fantasy's review of Minecraft, the niche audience or the big time audience will follow. I just shit on, I should say, Logan Paul and the way his audience isn't following wrestling based off 90 million followers versus where the 90 million viewers then. But this guy does have a dedicated following that went to go see his movie, and I've heard it's the worst movie of this year so far. Um, but my one of my stepbrothers was super excited to go see this movie, and this was back around Christmas time. He was like, "Oh, I want to save my money because he's in college. He's like, got to make sure I save enough money um, so when this date comes around, I can go see Iron Lung." I'm like, "What the hell is that?" He's like, "It's a movie made by Markiplier." I'm like, "Oh, he made his own movie." So like, he kind of broke this news to me. Um, and yeah, it's kind of what Sean Baker has done most of his career, and it led him to Oscar Gold with Honora. It's what um, independent someone who's truly independent does, which is self finance your art. And that's why I always get mad when people are like, they value independence and they value control over their movie, but yet someone like Ryan Johnson wants to shit on Netflix for not putting Knives Out in theaters, but yet he took the 200 million Netflix was going to give him, knowing Netflix is a streamer, not a movie theater chain. And that's my point, where if Markiplier had been told, hey, instead of putting this movie in movie theaters, we're going to put it on Amazon Prime, we'll completely fund it ourselves, he probably would have been like, no, it's important that this movie gets made in movie theaters. I mean, gets shown in movie theaters because that's how I grew up seeing movies. That's how I want it to be shown. Making a movie for the first time in my life. That's how I want to be in the traditional sense, and that's where I'm going back to, like, what do we want from movies? I didn't want this movie from him, but my stepbrother did, and that's going to be the case with another Minecraft movie, another Super Mario movie, the Sonic movies, all these things. And you can see Hollywood is slowly trying to figure out how to make movies for the TikTok generation, because they're trying to make stuff that looks well on TikTok, whether it be clips or ads, whatever the case may be. Um, but at the same time, the views on TikTok might not equate to dollars at the movie theater. And that's what Netflix is there for, because Netflix is giving you Stranger Things at home instead of you having to go to the theater to go see Stranger Things. And that's how it can dominate TikTok, because it's going to make you churn from TikTok to Netflix. And that's what Banks and I have basically been fighting for in terms of movies at home instead of movies in the theater, given how we have jobs, we have personal lives. So to make time to go out to the theater is always going to be a nuisance, especially when you have weather out of control weather, like a lot of people experienced last week, in terms of it was freezing cold temperatures or just tons and tons of snow. Um, so if you could watch a movie at home instead and just pay $10 more than you would pay at the movie theater, that's a better solution. And then figuring out that, obviously, is the tough part in terms of how are we going to reward the crew and the people who made the movie, like Markiplier is trying to say, of, since the movie did so well, I'm going to be able to pay my people well, because that's the other issue with the streaming and all that, and that's what Scarlett Johansson and Emma Stone were fighting Disney for, because they had back end pay. But if it's instead of going to theaters, if it's going to streaming, how are you getting the back end pay? Um, but what do I want for movies going forward? Banks had He Man on his most anticipated movies list, Masters of the Universe, I should say. And when that trailer dropped, we didn't get to talk about it yet. Because it was made by Travis Knight, who did the Bumblebee movie. Oh, I'm buffering. Okay. If I just lost y'all for a second, I was saying Travis Knight is making Masters of the Universe. He's a good filmmaker. Um, Even though he hasn't had too many big time chances in terms of live action, but he started an animation and he's trying to carry that over to live action. But that Masters of the Universe trailer looked solid. It looked like someone who knew how to make a movie, compared to the Mortal Kombat trailers and the Street Fighter trailers, which I shitted on, because the Street Fighter trailer basically shows you nothing except what our characters look like, because that's what they cared about, or how comic book accurate their character. I mean, how video game accurate their characters looked, compared to Mortal Kombat and trying to show you, like, hey, This movie is going to have the action and the violence you seek. So, one second. Talking by myself has gotten me parched, but yeah, what do I want for movies going forward? Look, I like all time movies. I like modern movies. Um, a few weeks ago, Rome asked us if we were looking forward to the Wrecking Crew. I said no, just on the basis of that looked like a movie made by AI in terms of pick two movie stars, pick a setting, pick a genre, and they were like, Dave Batista and Jason Momoa need to be in a movie. Why? Because they're two good-looking guys. They're two badass-looking guys. What's a movie we can make around them? Where can we set it where it makes sense? What's the genre? It looked like something that was so paint by numbers or manufactured that it didn't look interesting to me. But then a week later, I praised The Rip with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon for being something that was old school. And yeah, it looks like, oh, just put these two guys in a movie together because they're best friends. But as I stated, like, that's kind of been their plan since the pandemic, which is they made The Last Duel together. They co-starred in it together, and they were like, you know what, let's continue to make movies together. So that's why I didn't shit on that for being so manufactured in the way that like they're friends in the movie, like they're friends in real life, and they're playing, types of characters that they would play. Like Matt Damon's kind of the lead guy, Ben Affleck's kind of the supporting guy. Um, and that was made by, I think, someone who I think is a better filmmaker in Joe Carnahan. And no offense to the guy who made The Wrecking Crew, I just feel like he was hired to make that movie because he wants to be a working director still. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but he was the guy who made Blue Beetle, and hopefully he gets to continues to get chances to make movies, because if he becomes a journeyman action director, we kind of need more of those, since a lot of the guys are making action movies that don't know how to make action movies. And I said it with The Rip. Joe Carnahan's been making action movies and still doesn't know how to film a fucking fight scene. But the rest of the movie is so good, it makes up for it. It's just that's the weak point. Like, he's good at telling story. He's good at the thrillers. His comedy is always up and down in terms of his jokes, but still, I rest my case. And I say it because I really don't know what's going to get me to. I mean, Wuthering Heights is in a few weeks. Other than that, I might go see How to Make a Killing with Glenn Powell, given that it was also on my list, like Wuthering Heights. But what do I want for movies going forward? I at least want something that's going to be entertaining and not just new in terms of, oh, I've never seen it before. Like, that was the point of Sinners, was something we've never seen before. We've seen bits and pieces of it before, but not in the same movie, and certainly not told the way it was told. And it's always harder. This is why I was pissed about Bill Simmons saying, um, oh, I wish we had 5 more Ryan Coogler movies after Sinner came out. I'm like, the reason we have Sinners is because Ryan Coogler isn't making 5 movies over 5 years or even 7 years. He is taking time to make one movie, finish that movie, promote that movie, and then decide what the next movie is going to be. And yeah, he's been stuck in Marvel land because he'll be finishing up the Black Panther trilogy. But he's taking time on his movies so they can look how they look, sound how they sound, and most importantly, be as great as they are. Wakanda Forever does have some down moments, and it's obviously hard to top the first Black Panther, but it's still better than most of the Marvel movies post Phase 3, and it's still made by a guy who has talent behind the camera and as a writer. So just to be like, oh, we need 5 more Ryan Coogler movies. You can't streamline what Ryan Coogler does. I love Guy Ritchie. I do think Guy Ritchie's a great writer, great director, and I think he works at a faster pace because I think he knows his style and his approach to movies. It can be sped up, just like Steven Soderbergh does, because I know how much time to spend on editing. I know how much time to spend on score. I know how much time to spend on pre-prep and pre-production and prep and all that, which is why I can afford to put out 2 movies a year or two movies every 18 months. Because at this point, they've been doing it for almost 20 years, well over 20 years, compared to Brian Coogler's been doing it just over a decade now at this point, in terms of the professional level, not the short film style. I mean, I've like making feature movies for well over 10 years now. You know, guys like Fincher are going to spend, hours and hours on one take or multiple takes and setups and all that. Other guys are like the Clint Eastwood approach. I got a movie to make. I want to make another one after this. Let's get it up, get it out, so on. Um, and yeah, there's not much more to say other than that. I mean, I just want the stuff we haven't seen yet in terms of IP, too. Like they're announcing they announced the Call of Duty movie with Taylor Sheridan writing, Peter Berg directing. I'll be interested in that. I'll be interested in the other superhero movies that haven't been announced yet. But I'm just hoping we get the stuff that's, you know, really been, on the back burner. The Voltron movie, the Gundam movie. I'm not really as excited for both of them because the people making them. But to bring it to what I'm saying is, this is the stuff we haven't seen on the major live action scale, and that's what I want to stop selling us. I'm not shitting on Hamnet, but stop, because again, it's another way to tell the Shakespeare story, and I am interested in that. But like, we won't need another Romeo and Juliet. We won't need another World War II film, except the one that Chris McCrory and Tom Cruise might make, because that one does sound interesting. But they're also selling us a new Highlander based off the Henry Cavill promo pics they just posted. And I've never seen the original Highlander. I get the story, and it is something that I'm going to be interested in because Chad Stahelski's making it. But again, Highlander goes back to you know late 80s, early 90s, and that's something that's old that they're trying to sell as new again, like they are in Masters of the Universe, like with Street Fighter, like Mortal Kombat. Even though Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat have had updates and reboots, I think that the Mortal Kombat 1 game, without playing it, with just seeing how they retooled it and rebooted it, like the way DC did with Absolute, like what DC Comics, I should say, is doing with the Absolute universe, what Marvel Comics is doing with the new versions of the Ultimates. Yeah, like tell Spider-Man in a different way. What if he didn't get his powers until he was 30 instead of as a teenager? What if Superman was born and raised on Krypton instead of being born and shipped off as the planet's dying? What if Batman wasn't rich? I'm interested in those sort of like retool the stories. And if it's probably harder for the DC stuff, given that that's constantly being um, written right now, so there's not a bigger plan. And I would hate to see a rushed absolute Batman movie, but hopefully within the next 5 years we'll get an absolute Batman movie. um, and hopefully we'll get a version of the Marvel universe that is as crazy as the way the Ultimate is, but obviously that being more uh, connected compared to DC, since they constantly and will always have someone new in charge. um, yeah, but you can see this is what Star Wars is trying to figure out. Like, what are the new ways to tell Star Wars? And they were basically trying to do that since Ryan Johnson broke the chain, and then Dave Filoni and John Favreau were like, we're gonna try to break it as well, but fix it at the same time. But yeah, it's an interesting place. Like, and even something like Wuthering Heights is something that's old, but told in a newer way, in a flashier way. And I think that's just as important too. It's an old costume drama from an old book with new cinematography and new music to pair with it. And I don't think everything always has to be so radicalized to make it that way. The way Baz Luhrmann made his Romeo and Juliet, but maybe that's also the stuff we got to go back to. Like how we grew up with the 10 Things I Hate About You and She's the Man, the way that they told Shakespeare tales in a modern setting. Um, maybe that's the answer to, again, of what we want for movies going forward. But I think what Markiplier did was smart. I respect him for, without like I said, being a fan, because takes guts to make a movie. It's something I'll never do because I know how hard it is to make a movie. I'd be terrified as fuck to make one. Um, so for him to do that and to give people who supported him his entire career something that he spent time and passion on, that's awesome. There was also Chris Stuckman. He had a movie last year, and again, people shitted on that. I even think he himself said, like, as someone who was a movie critic, a YouTube movie critic, most of his career up until that point of making Shelby Oaks, he saw how hard it actually was to make a movie. So he respected, not that he didn't, but he respected, people who make them even more, just having to go through that, you know, pressure cooker himself. He was like, yeah, this is fucking tough. So when a movie goes badly, you can understand it's not always the script's fault or the director's fault or the actor. Like, stuff happens, and yeah, that's why it's tough to be a first time filmmaker. But thank y'all for joining me. I really didn't intend to talk this long, especially since I really probably should get to sleep in the next hour or so. um, we'll be back this weekend. We're gonna do the Michael trailer review, the Fast X news announcement, but I'm gonna talk about something with that Banks isn't expecting me to talk about as well. So stay tuned to that. Um, Again, make sure you're liking the videos, subscribing to them, subscribe to the channel, commenting on the videos, leave us questions or just comment your thoughts on us, the episodes themselves, some topics you'd want us to cover or that you enjoyed us talking about. Share them. We appreciate it. Again, we're on the quest of 500 and then 10,000, as Amp said. So we've got to get to 10,000 pretty soon. But check out Banks on RAOP with Amp, where they do the bonus episodes. On Tangent, which is what he does with B. Dot. Head over to the Black Announce Table's Patreon. Shout out to them, where Banks does Wiretap with Eve. Always got to support the family, especially when they work with Banks the way they do and take care of him, support him, and give him a platform to showcase his unedited, unfiltered side. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Davis, aka Drip, Instagram, DC. We'll be back Saturday or Sunday, probably Sunday, since neither of us want to watch the Super Bowl. So again, turn those notifications on, that way you never miss out. Peace.